everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about retain and modernize your current system. My name is Dan Norkin. I am a co-founder here at Envision Blockchain and happy to get into it. So today on the agenda, what we're going to do is we're going to use some of the concepts that we began to discuss during last month's webinar. We're going to extrapolate that a little bit, and we're going to introduce you to our DeOps accelerator. So on the agenda today, we're going to be talking about, first we're going to start with a little bit of a use case discussion and application analysis as it relates to decentralized operations and the applications that you could be using in order to perform decentralized operations. Second, we're going to be talking about application retention, more on that in a couple slides. And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce Native, which is Envision Blockchain's decentralized accelerator. Really excited to introduce that to everybody. Okay, so we have 30 or so minutes, so I'm going to do my best to cram as much information as I can in here. So when we talk about the use case evaluation, I mean, what's really important to kind of think about is business first, right? So we have applications, but what good is an application without a business usage, right? So on the left-hand side, that you could see that, you know, your use case could be used to generate new business models or to generate revenue streams that you didn't have before, or really just promote vehicles for customer intimacy, right? Because the applications that we have should be able to allow a more efficient operation, should be able to bring you closer to the customer than ever before, right? Because the customer is really what the business is all about. You know, and revenue streams, I mean, without revenue streams, I mean, what good is going into business for in the first place? And then on the right-hand side, we see just a whole list of different types of industries, or maybe, you know, horizontals. For example, if we take a look at aviation or automotive, energy and utilities, finance and insurance, sustainability, government, healthcare and life sciences, oil and gas, telecom, transportation and logistics, quality assurance, you know, realistically, you know, some of these are verticals, some of these are horizontals, but if you were to take the left picture and the right picture and merge them all together, you kind of have the basis of a use case, right? So if you're in aviation, what are your new business models? What are your vehicles for getting closer to customer intimacy? Same thing with automotive, right? And you can keep asking yourself these questions, you know? So a lot of the applications that we're using in order to perform our day-to-day, maybe they're old, maybe they're stale, maybe there's new ways of doing things that would be able to bring upon some of these ideals that you could see really on the left-hand side with new business models, revenue streams, and vehicles for customer intimacy. So we touched on that during the webinar last month. And as we move forward, right, let's say that you've identified a use case. You've identified your industry and your use case, and you know the fact that you need more revenue model or something along those sorts, but there could still be this barrier, right? This hesitation as to why applications don't get modernized, right? And we covered this previously, but just to go over it again, I mean, it's, you know, maybe when it was implemented the first time, it was implemented and there's like a bunch of integration spaghetti, and we'll actually show you what some of that spaghetti is going to look like in some of these next slides coming up. Or maybe in the middle picture, right, there's all this documentation that just wasn't done, right? Maybe it was an in-house development effort, something that was just needed to get up and running, you know, and just hasn't yet really been brought to the forefront. Where in the third picture over here, we're showing that there is, you know, learning involved, there's experience, ability, skills, growth, knowledge, competency, training. Maybe the in-house, you know, resources that your company has just doesn't have what it takes to really allocate the necessary time in order to modernize these applications. But what happens if you have a business critical application, right? Your business depends on this particular application to get modernized. Because if you don't get modernized, right, you're really going to be left in the dust. And we've seen that over the course of the past 20, 30 years, where the Fortune 500 are constantly shifting to those that are able to modernize, that are able to go with the times, right? Because as technology evolves, greater efficiencies and greater values are recognized, right? And that's really, the moral of the story here. So just to quickly go over, we provided last month 2 different frameworks, if you will, to take a look at your application, right? So we call this an application prioritization. There's a lot of tools out there that could provide this sort of prioritization. We're showing you a screenshot here with Microsoft Project. They have a really good prioritization tool over here that you can look at the total roadmap and kind of see where your different projects, if you will, if you want to call that an application, right, how they kind of fit in the fold and grade that against different criteria. So some of the criteria that you can take a look into, right, if you have a business critical application, maybe this is an old industry. This is why we showed aviation last time. Maybe there's, insurance industry needs more modernization, for example. Maybe there's other industries that just have not really, moved with the times, but you still have these applications that you got to work with. So therefore, this framework, you can start looking at the performance. You can start looking at the architecture. How is it built? You can start to take a look at the financials, the benefits, the cost, the total cost of ownerships, the risks that's involved with all of these applications, the operations that's involved, also the security and compliance that goes with that application, right? What requirements do you need to meet? And I think that this is really important, and this is a great starting point when you're looking at your use case and you're looking at your business critical application. I'm going to keep saying that. Now you have this framework, and you can look at it different ways, and we're not going to dive deep into this one. Please check out last month. So right now we're in August, so take a look at July 2020 webinar to go a little bit deeper. We provided some information as to how you can grade the performance and architecture and financials and risk and operations and security compliance. What we also did was we provided a second framework to go take a look at. And this is kind of the 5 R's of modernization, where the first R was retire, right? You have an application, it's just not doing what it needs to. The enterprise needs to run a cost-benefit analysis. You realize it's just not worth the expense. Retire it, right? It's gone. The next one is replace. So often a legacy application is providing some value, but the off-the-shelf replacement with a lower total cost of ownership or TCO is available, right? So then we have that option. Retain. Just to foreshadow, we're going to be talking about retain. We spoke about retain during the webinar last month. We're going to continue with that as it really relates to the native solution that we're coming out with. So when we're talking about retain, we're really talking about putting a modern wrapper or APIs or something along those lines around it, the application that is, in order to gain additional value and benefits, right? So just keep that in mind that that's what we're going to be talking about. But there's other ones like rehost, right? Rehosting involves keeping the same basic functionality, but moving into the cloud. And we've seen that push in the 2000s over here as we're moving from on-prem to the cloud. And there's so many benefits for doing that. This is not the time or the place for us to talk about, workload migrations, but that's something that we're big fans of. Last one, re-envision, obviously, and Envision Blockchain. We love that term, to re-envision. This is where you're rebuilding the application in the cloud using modern technology. It includes a new architecture, best practices, and between us over here in the blockchain industry, you've really seen a lot of re-envisioning. And I'm not going to necessarily say that that's bad. It's just complicated. It's time consuming. It's costly. There's skills involved, right? And we'll actually show you a slide of re-envisioning and some implementations, what we've done in the past. We have a story to tell with that one. So between between re-envision and retain in the blockchain industry, we really seeing these two, right? So you have what we call the ICO boom and bust, right? The re-envisioning. We have these new web apps, these new applications that are coming out. The struggle with that is organizations are not really looking to re-envision because it's an expensive and time-consuming, like we just said, process, where when you are re-envisioning something, right, you're basically telling somebody or some organization, we're going to just re-architect this whole thing and we're going to build this whole consortium and we're going to have 20 different organizations in this private blockchain consortium and each one is going to have to build something. It just gets crazy, right? So this is what we've experienced in the blockchain industry for, I want to say, the past 3 or so years, Envision Blockchain specifically, where we've been asked to go into these organizations, perform this use case assessment, come up with solution designs, and it's just where we were in the industry where really the only option was to re-envision. Well, realistically, the lowest barrier to entry is to tell a company, hey, your investment is good. You've just spent, I don't know how much into an SAP implementation, into a Dynamics 365 implementation, or an Oracle implementation, or whatever. You guys have, your organization has some sort of a web app that you've spent so much time integrating and there's all this spaghetti or whatever, but maybe it's documented fine. So for the rest of this webinar, what we're really going to say is, from a user adoption perspective, retain is really the way to go. Taking a step back, and again, we explained this in the previous webinar, we have expand. And the reason why we believe that expanding is so necessary with the blockchain industry specifically is because this is kind of what blockchain was really intended for. It's not, there's no blockchain application. And anyone that's telling you that there's a blockchain application is really looking to sell a web app with databases, with the front end, with the back end, and it might have some other services. And oh, by the way, there's also some sort of a blockchain that you're going to be writing information to. Maybe you're going to be hashing some information there. Maybe you're even using your blockchain as a database, which is a whole nother story, but we'll save that for another webinar. What we're basically saying over here is that, you can expand, and the expansion is something that is this expansion industry is constantly growing. So we have over here this quote that in order to address integrations and API requirements, organizations spend approximately $12 billion on integration technologies, right? So there was one point where no one knew what an API is. No one knew about integrations. You had to kind of come in there and stitch everything by hand. But now we're saying that, look, integrations are something that is common nowadays. As a matter of fact, if you take a look at any government RFP or anything like that, with any sort of new build that they want, the most important thing that they're asking for is that you have accessible APIs, right? So most likely everything that you have within your organization already has these APIs that are like these extension cables that are just ready to plug in. And when you're expanding, you're building your competitive advantage. You're enabling your business agility to be able to change and be fluctuating because you have these APIs, you have these connectors, right? That just like you plug out of one, you plug into another, and that's how you move with the times. You also can provide insights and situation awareness because then you can hook different monitoring systems up to there. You can reduce the costs and improve the efficiencies by not getting rid of your system that you've already, invested into. Now you're improving efficiencies by expanding that into, for example, a blockchain network that we're going to be talking about over here. So in the B2B world, as we relate to business process automation, 75% of companies are exchanging data with external organizations across 2 to 5 business processes. So this is what we're saying at the beginning, kind of like, organizations are already accustomed to performing decentralized operations. Nothing new. One company deals with another company. For example, if you're in manufacturing, you're buying parts from your suppliers, right? So that's two separate organizations. You can look at that in any industry where you most likely are working with, external organizations. However, 60% still use these bespoke systems or manual forms and faxing and email or, text messages or whatever to manage the information between organizations. So what happens in this situation when there's a process that needs to be reinforced, maybe needs triggers, maybe needs workflows, and you're experiencing this lack of, efficiency because there's just no connection? What do you do? Do you re-envision that solution? Are you going to tell someone that their multi-million dollar, Dynamics 365 implementation, or that their multi-million dollar SAP implementation was wrong because it doesn't connect to who they need to connect with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months down the road because they didn't know who they needed to connect with? Now we have to go ahead and re-implement a whole new solution? I mean, absolutely not, right? That's going to create a lot of tension and create a lot of rigor. So what is really the leading factor, right? And when we have traditional applications, right, this is kind of showcasing how you have, this kind of group of individuals, this icon here on the left that kind of represents an organization. And inside that gray square kind of box, you have a database, you have an ERP, you might have some IoT sensors, you might have some, some other systems, right? And this is kind of your application, right? So you have your ERP, maybe your back end, you have a front end, whatever. This is your application. And you have another company that has another application. And they don't even need to have the same components, if you will. But let's say that one's SAP, one's Dynamics, another organization is Oracle, another one is Salesforce, and they're communicating to each other today, right? I mean, current business happens in this centralized and untrusted way. This is like normal business, everybody, right? I mean, you need something, you send somebody an email. They get whatever that they need. They send maybe a text message over to the next company. Another company then sends a fax over to their, right? It's like this manual type of integration. So this DeOps application we're talking about, right? And DeOps, again, decentralized operations, where you're working across multiple organizations, DeOps applications could expand. And you don't even need to change your systems all the way around in order to showcase this, right? So this Envision Blockchain Connector that we're calling native allows you to be able to do this. And what we like to say is that, imagine that you can globally integrate with any system imaginable with ever compromising privacy and compliance. Is the biggest deal. The way that people were using blockchain in the past was that individuals were literally writing information to the blockchain. Now we know that there's encryption that happens, but there's certain risks that happen once that information is in the ledger for everybody to share. And even if you're in a private blockchain, you still have that information that's shared among your consortium, participants. Now, we know that in a private blockchain, for those that have set that up, everybody knows each other's participants. But what happens when, just because you know who's the participants of the blockchain, they still want those workflows to be kept private, right? If there's a buying and a supplying type of a use case of what we demonstrated before in different presentations, everybody bidding on what that buyer wants to buy, they need to keep that information separate. You don't want to game the system. If you're a supplier, you shouldn't know what other suppliers are bidding, right? That's part of the competitive advantage. So this Envision connector allows for this decentralized operations to integrate as a wrapper to your existing systems while still keeping the privacy, because information is actually not being written to the blockchain ledger, but rather the blockchain ledger is being used as a middleware, as a point of reference, connecting different type of systems together. And we'll showcase what that looks like in a second. So blockchain system integration 2.0 I want to share a little whiteboard over here. So here's how we're going to begin introducing our connector called native. So I'm playing this video here, and you can see that Blockchain System Integration 2.0, it kind of looks like this. This is coming from some of our earlier implementations where you had, you had an organization and they had information and they wanted to incorporate blockchain for a specific thing, right? So we had to develop out these manual integration points that would then, for example, feed a database, right? Because there was all this data that needed to be normalized through ETL processes, and you create different tables and staging tables, et cetera. And then that information from that database we'd have to create another, let's say a web API, for example, like an integration service that would feed another integration service, which is called a blockchain adapter, that would then connect to a blockchain, right? So that information would then feed the blockchain, right? Because we have these APIs that come from these smart contract functions. And then that information that would then get registered to the blockchain, for example, would then come back up to this web API gear. We had to create these integrations. Then it would then get sent to, let's say, a custom web app that we had to develop out in the past, or maybe it would be integrated into an existing organization anyway. And then that information then had to flow back to this web API, right? Because there was the interaction. That information then flew back to the blockchain adapter, back to the blockchain adapter, back into the blockchain, to the web API. That information went back into the database. The database would then feed the integration. And this was all like a manual process, right? That would go back to the original system. But if we were to erase that, and now take a look at the way that things have advanced in the past 2 or 3 years. If an organization already has systems like SAP or Dynamics, or maybe they built a custom application and their business partner on another side also has systems of record like SAP or Dynamics 365 or a custom app, realistically, all they need is a plugin. Just install that plugin that communicates to each other. And when you dive into what that plugin really stands for, the way that that plugin is built, which is native at this point, that's what we're calling it, native, it's built on these microservices architecture that separates on-chain versus off-chain activity. So you have messaging that sits in its own cloud, it's its own containers. You have a system of record that we showed you, like SAP, which is sitting in its own system of, which is sitting in its own cloud. You have enforcement of business logic, and then you have the privacy and confidentiality, which is also sitting in its own separate cloud instance. And then you have the blockchain mainnet, which is also sitting in its own client, separated from the rest, right? So the information that you have is actually storing in your own systems, in your own cloud. And the only thing that you're writing to the mainnet is nothing but a hash. Going on to the next slide. So this native connector that we have is powered by the baseline protocol. And I just want to call attention to the baseline protocol for just a couple minutes here, because at the time of this presentation here on August 26th, what we have is the official release of the init core branch, which adds all this new functionality. And you see it's highlighted right over here. Let me hover my cursor over here. You have the core folder. And the core folder are really the core components that make up this open source baseline protocol that has this microservices architecture that we were just talking about. And then you can use our native connector in order to connect to your systems of record and connect that right to the baseline protocol so that you can have all this orchestration happen. Again, so just updates on the baseline protocol over here. So as you can see right here, it includes updates on the APIs, on the smart contracts, on the messaging, the persistence, the privacy, and the different types as well. So definitely we recommend everyone that's watching this to be able to go onto the baseline protocol repo. Just type in baseline protocol, GitHub in Google. You'll be able to find it, no problems. So some of the next steps is we highly recommend that you contact us, start with the business in mind first. Let's discuss your use cases. Let's discuss your industry. Let's discuss what applications that you're using. Let's discuss what sort of modernization opportunities exist within your industry or just within your organization. Maybe things need to be set up first in order to take the next step. Maybe you are currently seeking opportunities to modernize your systems and just need a little guidance along that path. So definitely looking for different partnership options and modernization opportunities. And then obviously contact us to learn more about the Envision connector called Native. Just a little bit about Envision Blockchain and the various ways that we can help you out as a blockchain system integrator. So reading really from left to right is that we have a consulting and custom development services arm where we can help out with different proof of concepts all the way through MVP rollouts. We help out with everything from the mobile web, UI, UX, smart contract development, gathering functional and technical requirements, along with post-go live support. So we have a support desk, a help desk for you to make sure that the implementation is supported. We're leveraging modern cloud and on-prem solutions. For example, if your use case requires IoT configuration, blob storage, data warehousing, Kubernetes and Dockers and infrastructure as code and line of business application integration, trusted compute services as well. And we always like to mention that we have our consultative workshops as well. A lot of customers like to start here because this is where you can really, come with an education first approach, where we have everything from the baseline protocol, how enterprises use Ethereum mainnet as a workshop. We have tokenization workshops. We have discovery day workshops, dashboarding workshops, etc. So definitely feel free to reach out to us. Contact information is listed here on the screen. We want to hear from you and definitely see how we can partner. So please send us an email at info@envisionblockchain.com, or our website is www.envisionblockchain.com. Or for anyone that's still comfortable with using a phone, feel free to call us. It's 800-513-8334. Really thank you again for watching this presentation, and hope to see you next month as we continue to do these thought leader presentations on a monthly basis. So again, hope everyone's summer as well. Hope everyone's September is going to be happy and healthy. We'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye.